So unfair, Trump rages over foreign tariffs on U.S. goods in Liberation Day remarks, shocks the world. Hello everyone, today we will analyze an interesting economic and political conflict between the U.S. and Mexico, and the responses of President Donald Trump. This situation not only impacts the relationship between the two countries but also affects millions of workers and the global economy. Mexico exports nearly 3 million cars to the U.S. every year, a significant number, highlighting the economic interdependence between the two nations. So, when this relationship is threatened by tariff policies, what will happen? In 2019, President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 25% tariff on goods imported from Mexico, specifically targeting auto parts, a move that would have had serious consequences for both economies. This tariff was not just about economics, it was a diplomatic strategy that aimed to address broader political issues, particularly immigration and national security. Mexico, as one of the United States' largest trading partners, is deeply intertwined with the U.S. economy, and the automotive sector is one of the pillars of that relationship. Nearly 3 million cars are exported from Mexico to the U.S. every year, contributing significantly to the Mexican economy and providing thousands of jobs in both countries. When the U.S. president threatened to apply tariffs, it wasn't just about a tax on goods, it was a disruption of an entire trade ecosystem. Now, let's unpack the economic implications of these tariffs. If the U.S. were to follow through with such a significant tariff on Mexican goods, particularly auto parts, Mexico would feel an immediate economic squeeze. Mexico's automotive industry is largely integrated with U.S. supply chains, and a 25% tariff would substantially increase the cost of producing and exporting cars. This could lead to higher prices for consumers in the U.S., as companies would likely pass these costs down to the end consumer. Furthermore, U.S. companies who rely on auto parts and components from Mexico would face increased production costs, potentially disrupting manufacturing timelines and hurting American industries. The auto industry alone employs millions of people on both sides of the border, and tariffs could cause significant job losses and supply chain disruptions. But it wasn't just about money. Trump's strategy here seemed to be tied to his larger approach to foreign relations, which often relied on using economic pressure as a tool for negotiating political change. Trump's administration had already taken a hardline stance on immigration, and these tariffs could have been a way to force Mexico to do more to curb the flow of migrants coming to the U.S. This idea of weaponizing trade as a way to influence other countries was part of his America First agenda, which often put U.S. interests ahead of established international norms and trade agreements. On the political side, Trump's tariff threat was a clear attempt to flex American power in a way that was both bold and risky. The potential for this tariff to disrupt the economic stability of Mexico was not lost on the Mexican government, nor was it on the global stage. The U.S. was challenging Mexico on economic grounds while also using the threat as leverage to influence Mexico's immigration policies, which was a tactic that wasn't necessarily seen as diplomatic or cooperative. Mexico's dependence on the U.S. market for its car exports meant that the stakes were high. However, the backlash from such a move could also push other countries to reconsider their economic ties with the U.S. if they viewed this as an example of trade aggression. Moreover, this situation wasn't just a simple bilateral issue, it was a moment that tested broader international trade norms. Trump's use of tariffs as a diplomatic tool set a precedent for how the U.S. could approach its economic and political relations with other nations. While it might have been effective in some cases, such as with China, its potential consequences with Mexico highlighted the risks of this approach, particularly when it came to neighboring allies and partners. In stark contrast to the fiery rhetoric often seen in political conflicts, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum's response to Trump's tariff threats was markedly calm and composed. At a time when many expected a fiery retaliation, especially given the stakes involved, Mexico's vital economic relationship with the U.S., Sheinbaum chose to take a more measured approach. Her public statements were not filled with the anger or defiance that often accompanies such trade disputes. Instead, she communicated a sense of calm determination, emphasizing the need for dialogue, mutual respect, and the importance of keeping lines of communication open between the two nations. This reaction was a clear departure from the typical aggressive political rhetoric we've come to expect from global leaders in high-stakes negotiations. In fact, it was a notable contrast to the more reactionary style of leadership exhibited by President Trump, who often responded to criticism with fiery, impulsive remarks. Sheinbaum's response was a calculated move, signaling to both her domestic audience and the international community that Mexico would not be easily provoked into an emotional confrontation. So, why take this calm approach? One of the most crucial elements to consider is the difference in leadership styles between Trump and Sheinbaum. While Trump's political brand often centered on bold, dramatic actions and quick reactions, particularly on social media, Sheinbaum's leadership has been characterized by calm diplomacy and thoughtful deliberation. This leadership style is particularly important in a situation like this, where the economic consequences of rash decisions could have widespread implications. Mexico, under Sheinbaum, understood that responding with anger or defiance could escalate the conflict unnecessarily and hurt both nations' economies. Sheinbaum's careful language reflected an understanding that diplomacy requires more than just reaction, it requires strategy, patience, and the ability to keep a broader perspective, even in the face of pressure. Her calm response could have been aimed at demonstrating to the world that Mexico was a reliable and mature actor on the international stage, refusing to be drawn into a trade war that would have destabilized the region and hurt millions of workers on both sides of the border. From an economic standpoint, Mexico had much to lose from an all-out trade war with its largest trading partner. The automotive industry, in particular, was at risk, with billions of dollars in goods potentially subject to new tariffs. The response from Sheinbaum likely reflected a careful consideration of the long-term economic stability of her country. Instead of retaliating in kind, Sheinbaum's administration focused on negotiation and dialogue, signaling to the U.S. that Mexico was open to discussions and would not respond with threats of its own. Another critical aspect of Sheinbaum's response was its political calculation. By maintaining a diplomatic tone, she avoided the potential for Mexican nationalism to turn into an anti-American sentiment. In some cases, aggressive responses can ignite nationalistic fervor, which might initially boost a leader's popularity at home but can also deepen divisions between nations and hinder future cooperation. Sheinbaum, by contrast, chose to keep her responses measured, likely knowing that fostering an environment of mutual respect would be more beneficial in the long run, not only for Mexico's economy but for the stability of North American relations. In the broader context of international diplomacy, Sheinbaum's decision not to escalate the conflict also sent a message to other countries watching the dispute. It showcased the importance of strategic restraint in diplomacy, particularly when facing a leader who tends to escalate tensions. Mexico's response illustrated the value of maintaining a level head in global affairs, even when faced with aggressive economic policies. While Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum chose a calm, diplomatic approach in the face of President Trump's tariff threats, Trump's response to the situation was, as expected, far from measured. Known for his impulsive and often emotional reactions, Trump took to his preferred platform, Twitter, to voice his displeasure, making a series of statements that not only denied the severity of the situation but also mocked and belittled Mexico's leadership. Trump's reaction serves as a textbook example of his tendency to turn any form of criticism into an opportunity for confrontation, especially when it comes to his public image and political persona. Unlike Sheinbaum, who focused on maintaining stability and diplomacy, Trump's responses were less about diplomacy and more about defending his political power. His tweets, statements, and public comments reflected an individual more focused on appearing dominant and unshaken in the face of any challenge, rather than pursuing a logical, long-term diplomatic strategy. The question arises, why does Trump consistently react so emotionally, especially when his own policies are being questioned? And what does this say about his leadership style and his approach to foreign relations? Trump's emotional reactions are perhaps one of the most consistent features of his leadership style. Time and time again, whether it be with political adversaries, the media, or foreign leaders, Trump's tendency is to react quickly and often without restraint. This is a stark contrast to the more calculated diplomacy often seen in traditional statecraft. Instead of attempting to de-escalate tensions or engage in careful negotiations, Trump's reaction is typically immediate and combative, often through social media or public speeches. In the case of the Mexico tariff situation, Trump's response was exactly in line with this pattern. Instead of engaging in high-level talks with Mexican officials or offering alternative solutions to the trade dispute, Trump chose to deny the effectiveness or impact of the tariff threat, even as the international community was beginning to take notice. His tweets, which ranged from denial to mockery, underscored his instinctive desire to project strength, even if it meant contradicting facts or creating more uncertainty. Trump's use of Twitter as a weapon was not just a tool for communication, it was a way to shape his public image and maintain control over the narrative, regardless of the factual accuracy of his claims. This emotional and reactive leadership style reflects a key element of Trump's political brand, the emphasis on winning at all costs. Whether it's in trade disputes, political campaigns, or personal attacks, Trump's approach is less about finding a diplomatic solution and more about showing that he is the dominant force in any negotiation. His emotional reaction to the tariff threats could be seen as an attempt to maintain the upper hand in the public eye, especially as his administration often positioned itself as fiercely pro-American and resistant to outside pressure. There's also a psychological aspect to consider when analyzing Trump's response. His quick, emotional reactions can be viewed as a coping mechanism for the intense scrutiny and criticism he faces. Trump's need to assert his power and control, especially in moments of external pressure, seems to stem from a deep-seated desire to never appear vulnerable or weak. In many ways, his leadership is built on the perception of strength, and any sign of compromise or retreat is seen as a failure. This psychological need to project dominance leads him to respond in ways that deflect criticism and create an illusion of control. His public denial of the significance of the tariff threat and his mockery of Mexico's response, often in the form of sarcastic or belittling tweets, were ways to reassert his power and maintain his position. By downplaying the importance of the tariffs, he created a narrative where he was in control of the situation, even though the reality was far more complex. This need for control and dominance is a core aspect of Trump's approach to both domestic and international politics. It shapes the way he interacts with allies, adversaries, and even neutral parties, always seeking to be the one in charge, always aiming to be seen as the one with the last word. Trump's emotional approach to diplomacy and trade negotiations carries significant risks. His tendency to react impulsively, whether through tweets, public comments, or actions, can escalate conflicts and prevent the kind of measured decision-making that is often necessary in high-stakes international relations. In the case of Mexico, his denial of the tariffs' potential impact and his disregard for the diplomatic norms that typically govern such disputes may have complicated the situation further. By rejecting the seriousness of the threat to the Mexican economy, Trump may have unintentionally alienated key international allies. The U.S. had a critical opportunity to use diplomacy to resolve the issue with Mexico, but instead, the focus shifted to managing Trump's emotional outbursts. This created an unstable situation where both the U.S. and Mexico were caught up in a cycle of public accusations and media-driven narratives, rather than addressing the underlying trade and diplomatic issues at hand. Furthermore, Trump's refusal to back down or reconsider his position when confronted with contrary evidence also illustrates a broader problem in his approach to foreign policy. His tendency to double down on decisions, even when they are not working as expected, often leads to prolonged conflicts and missed opportunities for resolution. The tariff issue with Mexico is a prime example of how Trump's emotional leadership style can turn a manageable situation into a full-blown crisis. Trump's emotional reaction to the Mexico tariff situation is a textbook example of his broader leadership style, impulsive, confrontational, and often rooted in a need for control. While this style may resonate with his political base, it also creates significant challenges in international diplomacy, where patience, nuance, and strategic thinking are key. His quick reactions, driven by a desire to assert dominance and avoid appearing weak, often prevent the U.S. from engaging in the kind of thoughtful, deliberative process that could lead to more stable and productive foreign relations. Ultimately, while Trump's emotional outbursts may satisfy his personal need for control and public approval, they risk alienating allies and escalating conflicts that could have been avoided with a more measured approach. In the midst of the escalating political drama surrounding President Trump's trade policies, one of the most striking responses came not from a political figure, but from comedian Jimmy Kimmel. Known for his satirical takes on current events, Kimmel has made a career out of critiquing political figures, and Trump has often been the focal point of his humor. Kimmel's approach, unlike the combative and emotional reactions of Trump himself, is to use humor as a tool to shine a light on the absurdities and contradictions inherent in Trump's behavior. Through comedy, Kimmel manages to make sense of the chaos and offer a perspective that cuts through the noise of political rhetoric. As the tariff threat loomed over the U.S.-Mexico relationship, Kimmel used his platform to mock not only Trump's handling of the situation but also the underlying absurdity of the entire political theater. Kimmel's ability to use humor to critique Trump's actions highlights a broader cultural and political moment, one in which comedy plays an important role in questioning authority and offering an alternative narrative to the mainstream political discourse. His sharp wit and ability to find humor in the most dire situations have made him one of the leading voices in using comedy as political commentary. Humor, especially the kind Kimmel employs, is not just about making people laugh, it's about highlighting the contradictions and hypocrisies within the political system. In this case, Kimmel's critique of Trump's tariff threats goes beyond simply mocking Trump's words or actions. It is about exposing the larger absurdities at play in American politics during the Trump era. Kimmel's approach to humor is to underscore the surreal nature of Trump's presidency. For instance, the fact that a sitting U.S. president would escalate a trade conflict with Mexico over issues that were, in many ways, political posturing rather than substantive policymaking, is rich fodder for satire. Kimmel often highlights how Trump's behavior, whether through tweets or public speeches, seems more suited to a reality TV show than to the White House. By framing Trump's reactions in this way, Kimmel draws attention to the performative aspects of Trump's leadership, his need to always appear strong, unbothered, and in control, even when it defies reason. The humor serves as a critique of the absurdity of leadership that values spectacle over substance. By turning Trump's impulsive and often illogical responses into comedic material, Kimmel gives viewers a chance to laugh at a situation that might otherwise be too frustrating or complex to digest. It allows the public to engage with political issues in a way that is more accessible and relatable, making it easier to critique those in power without resorting to the same level of vitriol or anger that might characterize more traditional political commentary. Kimmel might use a segment where he juxtaposes Trump's tough talk about tariffs with the reality of the economic consequences, pointing out how Trump's threats are often disconnected from the reality of how global trade works. Kimmel's style of humor, while lighthearted, forces viewers to confront the absurdity of an economic policy being driven by emotional, rather than rational, considerations. This comedic take helps expose the contradictions within Trump's trade policies and highlights the dangers of governance based on spectacle rather than substance. In conclusion, the tariff conflict between the U.S. and Mexico highlights the complex factors in international politics, the interplay between diplomatic strategies, economic power, and changing leadership styles between two presidents. We'll see whether leadership changes in Mexico lead to a more stable foreign policy, and whether Trump can continue his leadership style amid growing criticism both domestically and internationally.